Hello, this is Father Juan Velez. Today I'd like to speak with you a few minutes about St. John Henry Newman and his experience of God's providence. Following the teaching of St. Augustine, whom he had read, and other church fathers, Newman understood providence as God's care for his creation and his creatures. On the one hand, the order that God places into creation, his wise plan, his knowledge of creation, and on the other hand, his government of that creation, which means that everything that happens is under his guidance and control. God has placed uh, laws in nature for an orderly, uh, an orderly course of events in nature, and also God acts through secondary causes, like human beings or things of nature, to bring about what he desires and what is good for his creation. When we speak of providence, we can speak about a general providence, which is the order in the created world, and then we can speak about a particular providence, which is God's care in the lives of individuals. Speaking about his own life, Newman wrote in 1848, God has created all things for good, all things for their greatest good, everything for its own good. What is the good of one is not the good of another. What makes one man happy would make another unhappy. God has determined, unless I interfere with his plan, that I should reach that which will be my greatest happiness. He looks on me individually. He calls me by name. He had a very real sense that of God's working in his own life and in the lives of others. Besides St. Augustine, he had been influenced by Bishop Joseph Butler, an Anglican bishop, who wrote an important book called The Analogy of Religion, Natural and Revealed, to the Constitution and Course of Nature, where Butler said, well, the order that we see in the created world tells us about the supernatural world. And we can learn many things by the likeness or analogy that we draw from the created world and what we see there, the goodness and the order and the beauty. In a sermon in 1839, Newman wrote, even though the feelings which prompt us to see God in all things and to recognize supernatural works in matters of the world mislead us at times, though they make us trust in evidence which we ought not to admit, and particularly incur with justice the imputation of credulity, yet a faith which generally apprehends eternal truths, though at times it degenerates into superstition, is far better than that cold, skeptical, critical tone of mind which has no inward sense of an overruling, ever-present providence. In other words, he thought it was worth running the risk of falling into credulity, rather than forgetting that God is working. He's ever present. He hasn't left the world, as the deist thought. God has a plan for his creation and for each of his creatures. In another famous meditation, Newman wrote, God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I never may know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. Somehow I am necessary for his purposes, as necessary in my place as an archangel is in his. So in other words, God has a definite plan for each one of us, and we have to try to discover that. And that led Newman to trust in God, to put himself in his hands, believing that God would lead him along the right path. In another sermon, he wrote, a sermon called A Particular Providence as Revealed in the Gospel, he wrote, we have little or no true comprehension of a particular providence. We conceive that Almighty God works on a large plan, but we cannot realize the wonderful truth that he sees and thinks of individuals. We cannot believe he is really present everywhere, that he is wherever we are, although unseen. Yes, we have that difficulty of seeing God in the big things of the universe, but not in our lives. Newman had the habit on his birthday of looking back on what the year had been, and he would write some notes. And often there he would see the hand of God in his life during that year. We can learn that from St. John Henry Newman, not only on our birthday, but maybe on a retreat or in other moments. For the English saint, belief in providence meant trust in God. It was a trust that imbued all aspects of his life, his personal dealings with people, events in the church, difficulties with the oratory that he founded, and the oratory school. He suffered at times during his life because of difficulties and many difficulties, misunderstandings, lack of appreciation. He also suffered from the death of oratorians, or a few oratorians left the Birmingham oratory, and that made him suffer. But through that experience of suffering, God purified Newman from attachment to what other people thought, and especially his superiors. And God led him to trust more and more in his working in his life. In other words, in the particular providence of God in his life. And he taught other people to have a similar trust in God's providence. I think this teaching, this belief in providence, is something that we see in the lives of every saint. But in a special way, Newman teaches us about this and helps us to appreciate God's loving care for each one of us and for all of his creation.